Once again, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Warren County Historical Society's Lunch and Learn for October. First of all, I need to thank Joyce Lovings-Browning for her assistance in arranging to have our speaker, Mary Cunningham, here. Without Joyce's help, literally, there would be no speaker for the October Lunch and Learn. Looking around, I do not see Joyce with us anymore, but I will thank her later, as you can thank her later also. Joyce worked for the great parks of Hamilton County for over 20 years as a naturalist coordinator, retiring in May of 2018. She has performed living history for 17 years, portraying almost a half a dozen historical figures. Our speaker today is Mary Cunningham. 150 years ago, she bucked the social norms of her day by being a woman running her own business. Not only that, her hard work enabled scores of medical students in the Cincinnati area to be better prepared for the challenging yet rewarding profession of practicing medicine in the late 19th century. She was an immigrant with very little formal education, yet she ran a successful niche business that was under the radar of most Southwest Ohio entrepreneurs, and I dare say most entrepreneurs in the country. She thought outside the box by digging up the box. And being a successful female Cincinnati area grave robbing body snatcher. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Cunningham.
You know, it best be a good reason for getting me up at this ungodly hour. You know, you people must not sleep in. I work the night shift. But the only reason I can think that you might want me here to talk to you all today is you want to become a resurrectionist. You know, that's the technical name that we prefer. We're also called bag-em-up men, or sack-em-up men, different things like that, or body snatchers. But I imagine that you invited me here today because you want to learn from the best. And that be me. And the reason why I'm the best is because I learned from the best. And his name was William Cunningham. God rest his soul. That man was my husband. William, you may know from other names. The Cincinnati Enquirer dubbed him the Ghoul of the Queen City. He was also known as Old Man Dead. He was also known by many mothers, I'm sure, that scared their children into going to bed early as the boogeyman. That was my William. He was 6'4" tall Irishman with shoulders as broad as Hercules. And in his day and in his prime, he needed no partner, not one at all. You see, he came to the Cincinnati area when he was about 25 years old. And although they called him a big Irishman, he was Irish by birth, but not origin. He was born in Virginia. He wasn't born in the mother country like I was. But William, I tell you, when he first came to Cincinnati, he had an upstanding real job. He worked at Spring Grove Cemetery. He actually was a grave digger before he became a grave undigger. You see, William, he was the entrepreneur in all this. William was a livery driver during the day, and he worked for the Ohio Medical College as a janitor. And when, after the war between the states, the enrollment to become a doctor just jumped way up. You know, we had 5 medical colleges here at the time. And there were so many young men wanting to become doctors. You know, it takes 2 long years to become a doctor. 2. And some of these men pay as much as $25 a semester. That's a lot of money. But the doctors used to, a long time ago, they would take their students on field trips, so to speak. And they would allow the students to procure their own school supplies. But as it got to where the doctors were more busy and there was more students to teach, that's where William came in. That is when they asked him, could he fill in and get the things that they needed? So of course he jumped right on that. He had no qualms with that. So it was an advancement for medical sciences, the way it was described and the way it was put to him. And of course, you wouldn't want a doctor to be going in after something and not know what he's going after. I mean, I'm not a smart woman, but I do know that most of what you got in there you need. So you definitely must have your doctors trained. And they have to pass anatomy in order to become a doctor. So that's extremely important. And they only want about 5 medical students per body. You know, you got 1 on each arm, 1 on each leg, 1 with the head and 1 with the torso. And when they have to double up and have more students per body, they don't like that very much. So William was always available to get what they needed. He worked during the day as the janitor and taking other things in his livery wagon. And then he started working the graveyard shift, so to speak. So William, like I said in the day, he had a system. He would absolutely take his wagon, and he had 2 of the prettiest gray horses, and he would do this by himself. Well, then when it got to be really busy, that's where I come in, and that's when we became partners. You see, William loved to take the paper. He considered the Cincinnati Enquirer his paper because he took it every day. He would read through this and find the different funerals that were taking place around the area. And then he would send myself to go to the funeral. You know, it's very important to make sure that when you go to procure your school supplies, that it's a safe situation. Because there's so many different things now. You know, most people don't like the idea of their loved one ending up in the dissection room. So what they do is they take precautions. There's this new thing, and I don't know if you've heard of it. So if you want to do this, you best be careful. It's called a torpedo coffin. The torpedo coffin was invented to where there's a device in the top lid of the coffin, and then there is more things that are connected to the body. And once all the goodbyes are said, and they close that lid for the last time, they connect the 2. So if that lid is reopened, boom, you better watch it, or you're going to be the one on the dissecting table, or at least what's left of you. And then there's something called a mort safe. Mort safes are like cages that go over top of the coffins, and then they lock them up. So mort safes are very popular too. But all this costs a little bit on the money side. So families sometimes will actually rig an old gun in the hand of the deceased. You have to be careful with that. Or after they get at the graveyard, they will put fine shells, like egg shells, all the way around. That way they can tell if it's been disturbed. And then they have wolf stones. Wolf stones back in the day were heavy stones put upon the graves to keep out the 4-legged kind. But now mostly they're used for the 2-legged kind. So wolf stones are also very popular. And so that's where I come in to scout everything out, and I became a professional mourner. And so did my daughter, Katie. You know, they like professional mourners. The more mourners you have at your funeral, that's a status symbol, you know. So they welcome anybody, whether you really knew the loved one or not. So Katie, like I said, my daughter Katie, she was so good at it. That girl could cry on cue, she could. And people would give her a penny or two just to shut her up. You know, she did get carried away sometimes, but sometimes what we would do is if the subject was good, then we could go back later. Other times the doctors would actually tell us where to go and if it was a good subject that they wanted. But other times we would just go to Potter's Field. Now Potter's Field is where they bury the unclaimed and where they bury some of the consumption victims and different things like that. Potter's Field is very good because they do not bury them as deep. You're not talking 6 foot, you're talking at least 2. And the caskets, you're not going to have a mort safe or any kind of casket torpedo of any sort. So you're not having to worry about that. But when you go, don't waste your time covering up the entire grave. That's not how you do it. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of muscle. You want to get in there and out as quickly as possible. So you're just going to uncover the top half of the grave. And you're going to need a few things. Number 1, you need a nice wooden-headed shovel. Anybody know why? The wood does not make as much noise on the dirt as a metal-headed shovel. So a wooden shovel is probably the most important thing. Another thing you're going to need, and ladies, I don't know about you, but I only have 1 or 2 good dresses, so please make sure you have an apron, because you never know what you're going to get on your hands. And believe me, if you don't think you're going to get your hands dirty, you're wrong about that. In the colder weather, of course, fingerless gloves. And oh, my favorite, a little bit of liquid encouragement. You know, you've got to take your mind off of it, and you really don't want to be thinking about what you're doing. Because you really can't think of them as your neighbors or somebody you might have known. You got to think of them as school supplies and advancement of medicine, okay? But after you get that grave open, sometimes those caskets can be pretty hard. So I always carry one of these. That's good if they decide to nail the coffin shut. You can pry that open and crack it open really easy. And I don't want to gross anybody out if you've eaten recently, but sometimes if you get it right, it's easier to pull out. But the preferred method is to have a nice good length of rope. You're going to want to take it and get it way up underneath the arms before you start to pull. Now, believe me, you're not going to be wanting to tie this around their neck and pull. Not a good thing. The doctors want the bodies in as best condition as possible. So keep that in mind. And then you're going to need a good gunny sack. Now don't mind this one, it's a bit on the stained side. It's a little on the used. I recycle when I can. So you want to strip them down. You strip them down as the day they were born. And why? Because it's only a misdemeanor to get caught with a dead body, but it's a felony to get caught with grave goods. So if you like that pocket watch or ring, leave it in the grave, because you can take the money you're going to get from the body and buy your own. So remember that. That's very important. And it doesn't hurt to have a wee bit of protection. You might not mind that. If you don't have this, you might want to have a knife. You get a hold of somebody that is objecting to what you're doing, you're going to have to protect yourself. So, and when you put your lantern on, don't light it until you've built up a backstop, unless you've got it smoked out on the sides, because you don't want to attract any attention if you can. And besides that, let's see. I always carry an extra rag. But these other two items are things that I use. A good pair of pliers. Anybody can guess what that's for? Ah, the teeth. You know, they don't need the teeth on the dissection table. But if you get some good ones, especially front teeth, the dentist down the road will give you a few cents for each one. So you can make a little extra money that way. Another thing too is a pair of shears. Yes, you got a nice long braid. It's not needed on the dissection table either. So the wig maker in town will also pay for a nice braid. So what you've got to do when you get them all out, and like I said, William, he had a system. You know, I told you I have to strip them down. Sometimes when it was a particularly good male subject, he had a warped sense of humor sometimes. But what he would do is he'd bring an extra hat, new jacket, a coat, and a blanket along. And he would sit them up on the wagon seat with him. He would hold them around the waist. He put the hat on its head, and of course it would bob around a little bit, so you couldn't prevent that. But he would drive right down Central Avenue in Cincinnati on his way to the medical college. And if anybody looked at him the wrong way, like, you know, what's going on, because he was pretty well known in town, he would just slap him upside the head and say, "This is the last time I drag your drunk hide home and you a wife and children to feed." Then he would drive him around the back door of the medical college and drop him off. So William, like I said, he had such a persona about him. And everywhere he went, somebody knew him. And he became very widely known too. It wasn't just the doctors in Cincinnati and the surrounding area. No, he shipped them all the way to Kansas. He went down to the office one time. He would take a nice crate, and we had a stable underneath the pharmacy where we lived on 8th and Wraith Street. And we lived above that pharmacy in an apartment, but underneath was a stable where he kept his livery wagon. And he also kept some tools there. He would take them around, and of course, draining them makes a good sense. And he would inject them with arsenic. Arsenic was a way to keep it a little on the fresher side. So remember that, just inject them with some arsenic. And then he had a box, and he would fill it with sawdust. He would put them in a gunny sack, and he would put clay or red lead in their ears and any other openings that might leak. And he would pack them up and ship them off. COD, of course. One particular time, he took it down to the American Express office where he shipped hundreds of bodies out of. And the clerk, knowing that what he did, he decided that he was going to take a look in that crate. Sure enough, it was something that William shipped all the time. And he decided he didn't want to accept it for shipment. He didn't want to get in trouble because the police had been poking around for a while. So what he ended up doing is sending one of his clerks around to tell William to come get it. And of course that made him mad, and then that's where his Irish temper came in. And he was like, well, it couldn't have smelled yet. So he went ahead and he went on back down, he picked it up, and he was not about to do without his $30, so he drove it around to the medical college and dropped it off. At the back door, that's important. Don't go to the front door, they don't like that. And the Ohio Medical College on the way, they actually have a chute in the back where the bodies are hoisted up through the chute to the second floor where the dissection room is. So that's a convenient way. You don't even have to take them out of the wagon. So William, as I said, he was doing pretty well, and this is only a part-time business. You know, we only do it in this time of year when it's nice and cool. you don't want to be doing this in the summertime. And you can probably guess why. So when the weather starts to get really warm, we stay home a little bit more. And one particular summer, I was out, and I get a little on the bored side, so I go for some liquid refreshment. I mean, what's wrong with that, huh? William was upstairs reading the paper, as he always does, and he had on his nice white linen suit for summer, and I was coming home, and some of my neighbors was picking a fight with me. You know, my husband had several nicknames, but I had one too. They used to call me Alligator Jaws. And I don't think I really look like one of those creatures, but I believe it was because once I latch onto an argument or something, I don't stop until I win. So when they were picking on me, I started throwing some rocks and some different things, and William saw what was going on, thought he had to come down and rescue me. Silly man. He ended up, I think the official police report was that he tripped and fell into the policeman's club. Gashed his head open, ruined his nice white suit, and he blamed it on me. Well, you know, we spent the night in the jail. And after we were brought in front of the judge and everything, he suggested that we were having that happen way too often, and that perhaps we should just get a divorce and go our separate ways. Well, I'm not really believing in divorce, and all I wanted was a piece of paper telling them that I was not beholden to this man in any way. Another thing, too, is I didn't want a divorce because I'm really not sure we were married. A little bit on the blur side. Even though we were together and we had our daughter. And you know Katie, she loved her daddy. She loved her daddy so much that she did not want to live with me. She wanted to live with him. So I said that was fine. And I went about my way. I did a little bit too much celebrating probably, because I ended up spending 2 months in the workhouse after that. William went on his way too, and he took on other partners, but he ended up slowing down and having difficulty. And he took some buckshot one night in the leg, so he had to end up using a cane. And then one night, he got caught with 2 bodies in the back of his wagon by the police. He got taken to jail along with the other 2 men that were helping him out. And while he was in jail, the bodies were sent to the local mortician for identification because they figured they were local. And they were going to be sending them down to the morgue in Cincinnati for evidence. Well, one night, 2 young men showed up to claim the bodies and take them back to the mortuary. They couldn't really identify them because they weren't that local, or the mortician didn't identify them anyway. But somewhere between the funeral home and the morgue, they disappeared. You know, if you don't have evidence, you don't have a case, and William walked away. William had the backing of the doctors. The doctors respected him. He never caused any trouble. He always got them what they wanted. And so therefore, if he ever found himself in a little hard spot, they were able to get him out, most times. Now, like I said, William got so angry with the gentleman who was the curator down at Potter's Field, too, Mr. Schaefer. And he went to the Cincinnati Enquirer, gave an entire interview on what Mr. Schaefer was doing. Mr. Schaefer would take the $1.25 that the city was giving them, and if it was a good subject, he would not bury them. He would take them around to one of the medical colleges and undercut William's price. It wasn't the fact that he was selling the bodies. It was the fact he was undercutting his price. William didn't believe in that. He was really angry with Mr. Schaefer. And of course, that's where his temper came in again, and he was bound and determined to see Mr. Schaefer on the slab. That was what he said. But not too long after that, William took sick. His leg never fully healed. He had difficulty with his heart, different other things, and he went into the hospital himself. He was in the hospital for a couple of weeks when the newspaper ran a story, Death of a Resurrectionist. And it was him. And of course he read it, and it said he lived in squalor and he was a horrible man, had no scruples, and he was a drunkard. Well, that part was probably true, but the rest, he was so angry that they printed this story before he even died that he wanted to see the reporter on the slab, you know? That was his answer for everything. I'll see you on the slab. But unfortunately, William did not get that opportunity. A few weeks after that story was printed, he finally did indeed pass away. He passed away, and as his grieving widow, I went down to claim the body. He was a big man. I mean, what can I say? But they wouldn't let me have him. He had a body contract out on himself. He pre-sold his body while he was alive for $50, top dollar. Did I see a penny of that? No. He knew because of who he was and what he did, he would not stay in the ground. So why not enjoy the money while he was alive? Not sure what he did with it, but like I said, I saw none of it. So what did I do? I lived up to my alligator jaw name and I pitched a fit. I cried and I was such a grieving widow that they gave me another $5. I don't know if it was because they really believed me or the fact that they just wanted to shut me up. So I did get $5 more out of that, and like I said, I celebrate a little bit too much and don't know when to quit. So I was in the poorhouse when they finished up with what William was doing. But what I heard that they did is, and this was his final request, is he wanted to be laid out. He wanted the doctors to drink a toast of really good Irish whiskey to him. And doctors came from far and wide when they heard that William had died. They wanted to see the man that had been sending him all kinds of supplies for so many years. And when the students were done, what he wanted them to do was to bleach his bones down, wire them together, and display him at the medical college. What they did is they wired his bones together, they put a pipe in his mouth, a hat upon his head, a shovel in his hand. They propped his foot upon a tombstone and put him in a glass case at the Ohio Medical College. Wow. And I'm assuming that that is where he'll stay as long as the college is in operation. But you see, this business is getting harder and harder, a lot harder. And Katie and I, well, she's with me now, so we're going to have to keep our noses clean as much as possible. But it's very hard to raise a daughter, and I'm still going to have to do this, and I've taken on some more partners, and we've created our own little team of going to funerals and making sure that things are safe. And Katie, she's getting to be really good at that. You know, she's growing up fast, so I'm thinking that she'll probably follow in her mother's footsteps. But I tell you what, being in this business is hard, so you better think twice on whether you really want to do it. But if you do, just remember this. Cincinnati is my territory, so you best move on west. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce, and thank you all for joining us. We will have Joyce back some other time as somebody else. So please enjoy the tour of the museum and the gift shop, and hope to see you next month.